أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Today we are going to discuss about the introduction of epidemiology. What is epidemiology? What are the objectives of epidemiology? What are the purposes of epidemiology? What are the goals of epidemiology? So let's start with a presentation. I'm sharing the presentation. These are the objectives of my presentation regarding epidemiology. Define the term epidemiology, state the major objectives of epidemiology, discuss the various models implied in the field of epidemiology, and explain the stages of natural history of diseases, and identify the 3 levels of prevention. So about the definition of epidemiology, epi means upon or on, demos means people, and log means knowledge. So study upon the people and getting knowledge is actually epidemiology. And further, it is the study of how disease is distributed in population and of the factors that influence or determine this distribution. So regarding the definition of epidemiology, what is epidemiology? It is the study of how disease is distributed in population and of the factors, those factors which may help in the contribution of the disease, or they influence or determine this distribution. And the distribution may be regarding the time, place, and person. Who are the people who have actually got the disease, at what season they have got the disease, and what segment of the population have got the disease. So these are the determinants or the factors of the disease that may contribute in its development. Taking it further, study of disease and other health-related phenomena in groups of persons. And according to Gordis, the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states in specified population and the application of this study to control health problems. What does it mean? In this definition, first, the distribution, the study of the distribution and determinant of health-related states. State means health outcome, like the diseases. What are the determinants and what is the distribution of the health-related states? For example, the disease is prevalent in a particular community. So what could be the contributing factors? The positive and negative factors. What are the factors that help in enhancing the development of the disease, and what are the factors that may help in reducing the disease? For example, better health facility is one of the factors, one of the determinants that may help in reducing the burden of disease. And polluted environment, unhygienic environment is one of the determinants that may enhance or increase the development of the disease. So these are the determinants. And the distribution, as I have already discussed, with time, place, and person. What is the time, the season, the person segment of the population, the time, place, and what is the area where the disease has occurred. And the application of this study to control health problems. And whatever you have got from this study, like you have got the data, obtained the data, you have analyzed, you have identified the factors, and then you try to making this study is the base to control whatever you have identified, the prevalence of the diseases, you have to control those problems as well. So that is the application of this study to control the health problems. And furthermore, the goals or aims of epidemiology. Scientific research is the process of suggesting the relationship between cause and disease in a field that may or may not be related to public health. Scientific research is the process of suggesting the relationship. It tries to suggest the relationship between the cause and disease. For example, if there is a particular community where majority of the people, they smoke. So smoking is the factor. And the disease, for example, the lung cancer. So the researcher or the scientific researcher is trying to build a relationship between smoking and the disease. In a field, it may be related to the public health, it may not be related to the public health. So they try, the scientific research is basically trying to build a relationship or suggesting a relationship, what could be the possible relationship between the cause and disease. Whether the factor is the absolute cause of the disease, or it may help in the contribution in the development of the disease. So that is a relationship. Further, evaluation research is concerned with the decision-making process to implement the new strategies, continue the implemented strategies that may or may not in the field of public health. So what is basically evaluation research? It is concerned with decision-making process to implement the new strategies, continue the implemented strategies that may or not in the field of public health. So to minimize or eradicate the disease and to prevent the reoccurrence of that disease. So it is basically concerned with the implementation of the strategies for the controlling and eradicating and prevention of the relapsing of the disease. Then what are the uses of epidemiology? To provide a clue to changes taking place over time, to identify subgroups in the population who are at high risk for disease, to determine the best or most appropriate types of primary and secondary prevention. Primary prevention prevents disease in the well individual, and the best example is vaccination. Secondary prevention limits disease by early detection, usually through screening programs. Epidemiology and prevention, why should we identify risk groups? And what is the reason that we go for the risk groups to be identified? The first one is to identify risk groups and to identify the associated specific factors or characteristics that put them in the risk group. For example, here I would take an example of pregnant women who are anemic. So anemia is the risk factor that may put them at high risk pregnancies. Early identification of disease through screening program to prevent the burden of disease on the risk group and to be able to provide the best available intervention. It is necessary to identify the disease earlier as soon as possible and then run a screening program so that it may identify the people who are apparently healthy, but they are carrying the disease, to identify them and accordingly to send them for the diagnostic test and then for the available treatment so that they can control the disease, treat the disease, and then reduce or prevent the burden of that particular disease. Now, the objectives of epidemiology, there are some specific objectives of epidemiology: to identify the causes of disease and the risk factors, to identify the extent of the disease found in the community, basically the burden of disease, to determine the health status of population, how many people are with the disease, with the diseases, and how many people are free of the disease, so that to determine the health status of the population. To study natural history and prognosis of disease, how the disease develops and what is the prognosis of disease. It is also one of the specific objectives of epidemiology. To evaluate new preventive and therapeutic measures and new modes of healthcare delivery. Now, this objective says that to evaluate the prevention may be through vaccine, maybe through teaching, and the therapeutic measure, whatever the treatment is given to the people, so that they can evaluate whether they are effective or not, whether they are effective or not in the treatment and in the prevention. That is one of the objectives of epidemiology. To provide the foundation for developing public health and regulatory decision relating to environmental problems. And then one of the objectives is to provide the foundation for developing public health and regulatory decision relating to environmental problems. There may be environmental pollution, environmental problems, which may contribute in the development of the disease. So one of the objectives of epidemiology is to provide a base for developing public health and regulatory decision so that they can control the environmental pollution and thus reduce the occurrence or development of the disease, so that and ultimately they may reduce the burden of the disease prevail in the community. Components of epidemiology, there are two main components of epidemiology, or you can say the types of epidemiology. The first one is descriptive epidemiology, identifying both pattern and frequency of health-related events. Descriptive epidemiology is basically related to the description of the disease and the identification of its related factors. For example, if I'm interested in determining the prevalence of diarrhea in its associated factors, I can conduct this study in the community and I can make a survey of the people, how many people have got diarrhea and what are the possible contributing factors of that diarrhea. For example, if the diarrhea was estimated to be 10% in a population of 5,000 people, then I can go for another objective, which is the identification of contributing factors. So I may ask in the survey about the food, about the hygiene, about the hand washing, about the cooking, about the environment, whether it is hygienic or unhygienic. So these are the health related, identifying the pattern and frequency of health related events. Analytical epidemiology focuses on determinants of health outcomes. Analytical epidemiology is basically concerned with testing of hypotheses, whether there is a relationship between the disease and the factors or not. So it is basically related to testing of a hypothesis. This is a cycle of epidemiologic analysis. Whenever you go into a community and you want to make a survey, you want to make decision, you want to make strategies, you want to make an implementation of those strategies. So this is the circle. How can you go through about it? The first step is to describe the studies data, aggregation, descriptive studies, data aggregation and analysis. You have to describe the data that you have obtained, and then you have to analyze to identify the factors, the possible factors. Then model building and formulation of hypothesis. Then you will try what are the factors and what is the prevalence of the disease, whether these factors are maybe associated with the disease or not. You can make several hypotheses, and this is called a step where you generate the hypothesis. And then whatever the hypothesis that you have made during your survey, then you have to test those hypotheses in analytical studies. So the first part is associated with the descriptive epidemiology, and the second one as well, because you have to formulate the hypothesis. These two steps are related to the descriptive epidemiology, and the third one is related to the analytical epidemiology, because whatever the hypothesis that you have made, now you have to test this hypothesis in the analytical studies. After testing the hypothesis, then you have again an analysis of results suggesting further descriptive studies and new hypotheses. If you have tested this hypothesis and again you go into the field and again you conduct a survey, again you analyze your data, and then on the basis of your result, again you are making hypotheses, and then you can formulate the hypothesis. You can list these hypotheses, whatever the hypotheses are, and then you can go for testing these hypotheses in analytical studies. This is an epidemiological triad because the disease cannot develop in isolation. There must be a cycle. One is to be associated with the other, and only then a disease can be developed. So the cause of any disease, whether communicable or non-communicable, are determined by the interaction between the agent, the host, and the environment. If there is no interaction between these two, for example, agent and host, agent and environment, environment and host, there must not be the development of the disease. If there is an interaction across these three, agent, host, and the environment, then there is possibilities of development of a disease. So what is an agent? We are discussing this. The agent, it may be a biological agent, it may be a chemical agent, it may be a physical agent. The biological example of the agent is viruses, bacteria, and fungus. The physical agent may be radiation, may be temperature, and the chemical agent may be any kind of chemical, for example, acids or whatever. And the host is the human being, where the disease is developed, where the disease takes place to develop. And the environment, where it works, is a reservoir for the growth of this agent. If it is a biological agent and your environment is dirty, unhygienic, several viruses, bacteria, and fungus may take place. Here they may grow, they may replicate, and then they can fulfill or meet their dose and attack the host. And then they may attack the host. So environment, there is growth of biological agents, and then the attack are within the replication within the host, and then damaging the host, and that is the development of the disease. So epidemiological triad agent, for example, TB, the environment is poor nutrition, communicable disease, low immunity, and the crowding, poor ventilation, bad sanitation is your environment. The host is who is poor, having a poor nutritional status, having some comorbidities, and having low immunity because of poor nutrition. So if there is an agent, for example, the TB microorganism, it can easily attack. It can easily attack and replicate within this host. And the environment, the best example is overcrowding for TB microorganisms. If the host has the TB microorganism and this host coughs, it may transmit it. This host can transmit the disease to other people who are living nearby in a single room. So they can easily get the disease, the microorganism, and then replication, and then damaging the lungs. Classification of agent: living and non-living, living or biological, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses, etc. And non-living: nutrients, chemicals, and your physical agents. The nutrients could be fats, vitamins, mineral in excess or low amount, and the chemical: lead, arsenic, alcohol, sulfuric acid, other, for example. And the physical could be atmospheric temperature, pressure, radiation, sound, vibration, etc. All these are example of the non-living agents. Host, the host is the man himself, and his characteristic. For example, what is the age? If the person is older, he is prone. If he is under 5, he is also prone. He or she is under 5, they are also prone. Sex, some diseases may easily develop in males and some in females. So what is the sex? And race, ethnicity. For example, some of the diseases are very common, very commonly prevailing in a specific ethnicity. For example, Pathan, Sindhi, Punjabi, and Baloch. In the socio-economic status, whether the host is poor or he is rich, having money for buying food or not. And the lifestyle, whether they are living with simple lifestyle, they are having a habit of hoteling, they go to hotel and they take their foods there. So what is the lifestyle, whether they are smoking or not smoking? So all these comes under lifestyle. Environment X is a reservoir for the agents of disease. This is the environment which acts as a reservoir where the microorganism live, they multiply, they replicate, and then they attack on the host. The host environment interaction, virtually all chronic diseases have multifactorial etiologies. Many may have infectious components. For example, enterovirus, it is proposed that it contribute in the development of type 1 diabetes mellitus. Epstein-Barr viruses, it is proposed that it contribute in the development of beta cell lymphomas. Similarly, chlamydia pneumoniae is proposed to have a contribution in the development of heart diseases. Helicobacter pylori is associated with peptic ulcer disease, hepatitis B and C with liver cancer. Borna disease virus may be associated with the schizophrenia. So all these are theories. These are theories that these viruses, biological factors that in one way or the other contribute in the development of these list of diseases.